It was the 1930s in the United States, and the streets were ruled by the Mafia. Among them was a man named Vito, a well-respected and feared leader of the Italian-American Mafia. Vito had a son named Marco, who was born and raised in the world of organized crime. Marco had always known that he would follow in his father's footsteps, but he was not always enthusiastic about it. He saw how his father's work took a toll on their family life, and he wanted a different path for himself. However, as he grew older, he became more and more drawn to the power and wealth that came with being a part of the Mafia. One day, Marco's father took him to a meeting with other Mafia leaders in the city. It was a tense meeting, and they were discussing a dispute over territory. Marco was just there to observe and learn, but he found himself getting caught up in the drama. "You see, Vito," said one of the other leaders, "we've had our eye on that territory for months now. We were planning to make our move next week, but now your men are there. We can't have that." Vito leaned forward, his face stern. "My men are there because I told them to be there. That territory belongs to me now." The other leaders looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. Then one of them spoke up. "But Vito, you know that's not how it works. We all have our own territories, and we respect each other's boundaries." Vito stood up, his eyes blazing. "I don't care about your rules. I care about power. And if you want to challenge me, you know what will happen." The tension in the room was palpable. Marco could feel his heart racing as he watched his father assert his dominance over the others. He knew that this was the world he was entering, and it scared him. As they left the meeting, Vito put a hand on Marco's shoulder. "Don't worry, son," he said. "You learn how to handle these situations. You're going to be a great leader one day." Marco nodded, but he wasn't so sure. He had always been a bit of a rebel, and he wasn't sure he had what it took to be a ruthless Mafia leader like his father. Over the years, Marco continued to work in his father's organization, rising through the ranks and becoming more and more involved in the day-to-day operations. He saw the good and the bad sides of the business, and he struggled with the moral implications of his work. One day, Marco was tasked with delivering a message to a rival Mafia boss across town. It was a routine task, but as he made his way through the city, he noticed something strange. He felt like he was being followed. He tried to shake off the feeling, but it only grew stronger. Finally, he turned a corner and found himself face to face with a group of men who were clearly not friendly. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We want you to deliver a message to your father," one of them said. "Tell him to back off from our territory, or there will be consequences." Marco knew he was in trouble. He tried to bluff his way out of it, but the men were not interested in negotiation. They attacked him, and Marco found himself fighting for his life. It was a brutal fight, and Marco was badly injured. But somehow, he managed to get away and make it back to his father's office. Vito was furious when he saw Marco's injuries. "Who did this to you?" he demanded. Marco told him the story. Vito listened intently to Marco's account of what had happened. His face grew dark with anger as he realized the severity of the situation. "We can't let them get away with this," Vito said, his voice low and dangerous. "We need to send a message that we won't be intimidated." Marco knew what that meant. It meant retaliation, violence, and possibly even death. But he also knew that he couldn't back down. He had to prove himself to his father and to the others in the organization. "Let me take care of it," Marco said, his voice steady despite the pain he was in. Vito looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine. But be careful. These guys are dangerous." Marco spent the next few days planning his revenge. He knew that he had to strike back hard and fast, or his father's reputation would be damaged. Finally, he came up with a plan. He would go after the rival gang's leader directly. He would sneak into his house in the middle of the night and take him out. It was a risky move, but Marco felt confident in his abilities. He had been trained in hand-to-hand combat by some of the best fighters in the organization, and he knew how to handle a gun. That night, Marco snuck into the rival gang leader's house. He moved like a shadow, avoiding the security cameras and the guards. When he reached the leader's bedroom, he hesitated for just a moment. He had never killed anyone before. But then he thought of his father's disappointment if he failed, and he steeled himself. He pulled out his gun and aimed it at the sleeping man's head. He took a deep breath, then pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the house. Marco felt a rush of adrenaline as he realized what he had just done. He quickly made his escape, but as he ran down the street, he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. He knew that the police would be on their way soon. He made it back to his father's office just as the police arrived. Vito looked at him, his eyes unreadable. "You did what you had to do," Vito said finally. "But you need to be more careful in the future. This isn't a game." Marco nodded, feeling the weight of his actions heavy on his shoulders. He knew that he had crossed a line, and he wasn't sure if he could ever come back from it. Over the next few weeks, things in the organization were tense. The rival gang retaliated, but Marco and his father were ready for them. There were a few close calls, but in the end, they emerged victorious. After the dust settled, Vito called Marco into his office. "I'm proud of you, son," he said. "You proved yourself to be a valuable member of this organization." Marco felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had done what was necessary to protect his family's honor and reputation. But he also knew that he couldn't keep living this way forever. He started to think about his future, about what he wanted for himself outside of the Mafia. He knew that he had a talent for business, and he started to dream of running his own legitimate enterprise someday. But for now, he was content to continue working for his father, learning everything he could about the world of organized crime. He knew that it was a dangerous and violent world, but he also knew that he was good at it. And most importantly, he knew that he had his father's love and support, no matter what path he chose to take in life.